In this episode, we're going to have a go at making some oozes and some slimes. Hello and welcome back. Now, before I get started, I do just want to quickly point out that it might seem like I'm trying to reinvent the wheel with this one, as there's quite a few videos out there already that show how to make this kind of thing just using hot glue. I mean, here's a couple of examples that I made myself a while back. However, I wanted to have a go at making something that didn't require any paint, and something that fits with the whole print and paste thing that this channel focuses on. Plus, there's also a custom monster that appears in the Dungeon Box adventure from episode 94. So, I wanted to have videos available that shows you how to make everything that you need to run those encounters. You know, the dungeon itself, the puzzle handout, the undead miniatures, and now the ooze monster at the end. So, now all of that's out of the way, let's get started on the actual video. Okay then, so the first thing we'll need to do is take a piece of thick card and cut that into a 1-inch square. Then, using a sharp pair of scissors, we'll cut that into an irregular shape. Next, we'll take a 2-inch piece of scrap paper and we're going to scrunch that up a few times and just kind of form it into a small mound. You know, one that will fit on top of the card piece that we just cut out. Then, using a bit of hot glue, we'll stick that into place, like you can see me doing here. So that we end up with something like this. Okay, so once we've done that, we can then blend the paper mound into the base with a bit more hot glue, mainly by adding glue around the edge and creating more of a slope. And as you can see, you might have to do this a couple of times, letting the glue dry after each pass. So we're aiming for this kind of thing. This is going to be the kind of base, almost. Anyway, next we're going to be covering that in one of the slime textures, and while it's not all that important for this part of the build, I have printed the texture on both sides, as this will make things look a bit better in some of the later stages. But yeah, from that we'll cut out another 2-inch piece, and like before, we'll scrunch that up a few times, this time to make it nice and malleable. There you go. Then, what I like to do is cut away some of the extra paper that we're not going to need when wrapping it around the piece. Then we can apply some glue to the back, and I'm just using a regular glue stick here. But before gluing it into place, I think it makes things easier if you make lots of little cuts all around the perimeter, like I'm doing here. And when we've done that, we can place the first piece in the middle and start wrapping the texture around it, kind of bending the little flaps down and underneath. 1 or 2 flaps at a time. So, yeah, I'll leave the video running while I do just that. So, there you go. That's what it looks like at this stage. And if you've got any areas where it hasn't quite covered properly and there's some glue showing through from underneath, don't worry about that now, we can cover that up later. Anyway, next we're going to take another 2-inch square of the slime texture, and this time we're going to cut it in half along the diagonal, so that we end up with a piece that's this shape. At this point, I also like to scrunch it up again, though I'm not sure it's all that necessary, and then, to make the arm of the kind of pseudopod, we'll roll that into a tube, and like you can see, I'm using a toothpick to help with that. And now that we've got the basic shape formed, we can unravel it, apply some glue to what's going to be the inside of the tube, and roll that back up again, trying to make it so that it gets a bit wider towards the bottom. So it's an elongated point, you know, the kind of thing that you can see here. Then we'll need another piece of the slime texture that's been cut into a 1-inch square, which we'll scrunch up again, and then form it into a tight as little ball as possible. So, there you go, something like that. And we'll then give the first 2 pieces a few minutes to dry. Right then, so once the glue's had a few minutes to set, we'll need to squash the pointed end of the tube flat, and at the same time, give it a slight curve. We can then add a tiny bit of glue to the flattened area, and stick the little ball to the end, and then kind of roll that down into the glue. Maybe even repeating the process if you feel like you want to fix it down a bit more securely. And what we're aiming for here is something that looks a bit like this. And while I have it in shot, I'm also going to bend it into more of a kind of twisting tentacle type of shape. So, there you go. Okay then, so if I bring the first piece back in, all we're going to do is glue this pseudopod thing to the top. And that might mean that you have to bend it into a better looking shape first, or, like you just saw, cutting it to a more suitable height. And we can just use some hot glue again to fix it into place, like you can see me doing here. So this is what this particular piece looks like at the moment, though we are going to bulk out the bottom a bit more. And to do that, we'll take a roughly 1/2 inch strip of the texture, scrunch that up to make it more malleable, apply some glue to the back, and then wrap that around the base of the pseudopod, with the aim of trying to blend it into the base a bit better. And you might need to cut away some of the excess, or use multiple pieces like you'll see here in a second, but like I say, we're just trying to blend the two together, that's all. And this is the kind of thing we're trying to achieve, so something that looks a bit like an old wizard's hat, I suppose. Anyway, if you like, you can also add 1 or 2 smaller pseudopods to the piece, and to do this, it's just a matter of halving all the sizes. So this time we'll start with a 1 inch textured square, which we'll cut along the diagonal to give us the piece we'll need to make the smaller arm. We'll then take a 1/2 inch square of the texture and use that to make the smaller ball. And those can be assembled in the exact same way to make a smaller pseudopod, like this one here. But yeah, it's then just a matter of deciding where it looks best, and then gluing it into place, not surprisingly using the glue gun again, so that it ends up looking something like this. And while we're at it, we can also bulk out the bottom again, if you think it needs it. I thought I may as well, as I have a few strips of the texture left over, so that's what I'm doing. And before we go any further, we can also cover up any of those bits that I mentioned earlier, you know, where the texture didn't quite cover the base properly. So I'll do that here as well. And this is how it looks when we've done all of that. Though up close, it does look a bit patchwork because of all the overlapping bits of paper, but we'll hide some of that in the next step. Okay, so the next step is to simply cover the entire thing in a thin layer of hot glue. And if, like me, you're using regular hot glue sticks, then you don't want to put it on too thick, otherwise it can dry a bit cloudy. I mean, you still want to make it a bit lumpy if you can, to give it some added texture, but as I say, try and keep it to a minimum, while at the same time still covering the whole thing. And as you can see, you'll probably need to do this in stages, you know, letting one part set, so that you can then hold on to that part while working on the next bit, and so on. So I'll leave the video running again while I go ahead and cover the entire piece. So there you go, though you might just be able to see that there are some annoying hot glue wisps here and there. And to get rid of these, we can just briefly run those areas through a flame, like from a lighter or something like that. Though do be careful when doing this, as you really don't want to burn yourself. Anyway, there you have it. There's our slime, free of any hot glue wisps. And as I mentioned at the beginning, for the dungeon box adventure, you're going to need to make 3 or 4 of this size and colour, and 3 or 4 smaller ones as well. And these are made in a similar way, except that for the base I used a 20mm square of card that was then cut into an irregular shape. The piece of scrap paper I used to make the mound was 1.5 inches in size, and here it is as the little mound. That was then covered in a 1.5 inch square of the texture, like so, and the pseudopod, that used the same half-size pieces that you saw a few minutes ago, though you can of course make them however large or small as you like. And the reason we're going to need 3 or 4 of each of these particular ones is because in the adventure that I've put together, the final boss monster is a huge slow-moving ooze that's taken up residence in the empty pool of the last room. And when it springs into life, we can represent this by putting the slimes on top of the pool itself, like you can see in this picture. However, it's only really the larger ones that represent the main bulk of the slime, and if the characters decide to try and attack it from range, then it has the ability to detach small parts of itself and hurl them at the intruders. And as you might have guessed, these are the smaller ones. But yeah, I also wanted this episode to be more than just the slimes that I'm creating for my own adventure, so I've also included a texture that's grey in colour that can be used for making, well, grey oozes, and one that's more of a yellowy orange colour, like you can see with this piece here. And it's also worth noting that you don't have to use them just to make this kind of thing. For example, I've taken the fourth texture, a green slime, and used that to make this dungeon tile, which was made in a similar way to the lava tiles back in episode 50. And with that, I think that's everything that I wanted to cover in this one. Though I will add that if you keep an eye on the community page here on YouTube, I'll see if I can tidy up my notes for the Dungeon Box adventure and share what I've written for it over there when I get the chance. So thanks for watching, and as always, I'd love to know what you think of these. As I say, I know there's probably better ways to make them, but I thought I'd have a go at a print and paste version, for the dungeon in a box, as I keep saying. But yeah, thanks again, and with any luck, I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.